So today we're going to look at the order of operations. This is something you learned probably before last year in elementary school. When we have a whole bunch of different operations to perform, we have to follow a certain order when we're working in algebra and moving forward. So there's 4 steps, and the easiest way to remember this is either using just PEMDAS, which is pretty common, or the little saying, "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally," and each letter that begins each word stands for something. But you'll notice, it's curious, there's 6 letters, but there's only 4 steps. Okay, so we need to make sure that we can keep that straight. Every letter is important, but there's only 4 steps. There's not 6 steps. Okay, so step number 1, you probably remember, the P stands for parentheses. And that's only when there's an operation inside of the parentheses. What do I mean by that? So we use a lot of parentheses now to kind of close in our negatives and just use it for organization. So if you see parentheses that are just there to organize, or if they're just there to help you see that you're going to multiply 2 things together, then that doesn't mean you do those first. When we talk about parentheses, we're talking about there's something to do on the inside, an operation, adding, subtracting, multiplying, dividing. Okay, there's something to complete. We got to find the quantity on the inside before we raise it to an exponent or before we do something with it. So that's the first thing you always do. This includes absolute value. So we use parentheses as our key word to remember this with PEMDAS and "Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally." But what this really is take care of things that are grouped. Okay, so that includes absolute value. It's grouping something. We need to take care of the inside before we do anything else. So number 2 is E, and that's our exponents. That's what we've been working on. So we need to simplify all our exponents. Remember, that's 5 to the second or something like that. You're going to take care of that next. So after the inside of your parentheses are done, then you take care of exponents. And now we have 2 steps left, and we have 4 letters, M, D, A, and S. And everybody knows it's multiply, divide, add, and subtract. But the most common misconception is that you multiply everything first. Then you divide everything. Then you add, and the very last thing you always do is subtract. And that's not true. Okay, sometimes that could be true, but that's not true every time. So step 3 is multiply and divide. Not multiply, then divide. Multiply and divide. You do them at the same time. It all just depends which one you see first. So you read the problem from left to right. Okay, so if you see division first, then you do that. If you see multiplication first, then you do that. Okay, so it does matter. Number 4 is add and subtract. Again, keyword and, not then. You don't add and then subtract. You add and subtract at the same time, whichever you see first from left to right. And I'll show you why it makes a difference. So let's slide down. You've done a million of these before. We're going to start with some nice, easy ones. Number 1, 10 plus 2 times 4. So if I gave that to, say, a 4th grader, they might get this wrong because they're going to add 10 plus 2 and get 12 and then times it by 4. But that's not following the order of operations. So we need to follow PEMDAS. So there's no parentheses, there's no exponents, but there is multiply and divide. Okay, and then we add and subtract. So before we add and subtract, I have to do 2 times 4. So I'm going to simplify this. Now, in this unit, one of the biggest things is going to be showing your work. Okay, and we're going to work straight down. As we get to algebra and we're trying to solve equations, we're going to work down with everything. Okay, so it's really important that we start good practices now. So first thing I'm going to do is multiply 2 times 4. So since nothing's happening to the 10, I'm going to rewrite it. The 2 times the 4 becomes an 8, and 10 plus 8 is 18. A much different answer I would have gotten if I added first and then multiplied. So let's go over to number 2. Look at what you have first. You need to look at the whole problem and think about what you're going to do before you start writing. I have addition, subtraction, multiplication. Multiplying and dividing come first. So the first thing I'm going to do is the 1 times the 5. So I'm not doing anything with the 2. I'm not doing anything with the 5. and I'm going to subtract my answer to this multiplication problem. So 1 times 5 is 5. Now it's all adding and subtracting. I'm going to do it from left to right. 2 plus 5 is 7, and 7 minus 5 is 2. Notice how I showed every step. That's what's expected. If there's a number that you're not doing anything with, it needs to come down, and I should be able to follow your work. Number 3, multiplication, division, addition. So addition is last. So I'm going to divide, and I'm going to multiply. Those happen at the same time. So 18 divided by 2 is 9. Bring down my plus. 5 times 3 is 15. Okay, they happen at the same time. Last thing I do is add, and my answer is 24. Now, number 4 is a good example of a problem that if you don't follow your order of operations correctly, you can easily get this wrong. So off to the side, we're going to do one incorrectly on purpose. So let's rewrite the problem real quick. A lot of people who think you add first and then subtract would do the 6 plus 3, the 4 plus 5, and then subtract. So what would they get? They would add, and they'd get 9. They would add, they would get 9, and then they do 9 minus 9, and they get 0. That's incorrect. So watch what happens. We're supposed to go from left to right, whichever we see first. Add and subtract. So first thing I'm going to do is 6 plus 3. That's 9. Anything I haven't done, bring it down. Next, I'm going to do 9 minus 4. That's 5. Then I'm going to do 5 plus 5, and that's 10. Look at the difference in the answers, 0 and 10. That's a big difference. This is the correct one. This is the incorrect one. So we must follow our order of operations. Number 5. No parentheses here, but I do see exponents. That's the first thing I'm going to do. So 3 to the second, remember, is not 6. It's 3 times 3. We no longer have to write it out as 3 times 3. You can just write the answer. Anything that I have not done needs to come down. Now I just go from left to right. So 9 plus 4 is 13. I didn't do anything with the 8, so I rewrite it. And 13 minus 8 is 5. That's the amount of work that's expected. Number 6. I do have parentheses. That's the first thing I'm going to do is simplify what's on the inside. So 2 plus 2 becomes a 4. Bring everything down. I now have subtraction and division. Okay, so division comes first. 4 divided by 4 is 1. I am not doing anything with the 5, so I'm going to rewrite it. I know you could probably do this in your head without writing it, but I need to see your steps. 4 divided by 4 is 1. And now 5 minus 1 is 4. Final answer. Number 7. Parentheses, parentheses. Since they're next to each other, that means multiply. So 5 minus 2 is 3. 5 plus 1 is 6. Always complete the inside first. Now the only thing left to do is multiply these two together, and that's 18. Last one. I see parentheses. I'm going to take care of that first. 6 minus 3 is 3. I'm going to bring everything down. After I do parentheses, exponents is next. So I'm going to simplify this exponent over here, which means I haven't done anything with the 4 times the 3. I'm going to leave it alone. Negative 2 to the third. If you were going to write it out in expanded form, it's negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2. A negative times a negative, and then times another negative. That's going to give me a negative answer. And 2 times 2 times 2 is 8. Okay, this is why we spent so much time on exponents the past couple of days. It's really important that we know that's negative 8, not positive 8. All right, now I'm going to multiply before I add. So now I have 12. And the last thing I do is combine these two, addition, and my answer is 4. All right, flip it over to the back. Let's look at some more difficult ones now. Those ones we just did together were probably more of a 6th grade level, little 7th mixed in, because we did throw some negative numbers in there, but for the most part, it's kind of below where we want to get to. So these are going to be the higher level questions. So when I look at number 1, I notice I've got this kind of fraction looking thing, and we should know at this point that's division. All right, that's division. So I'm going to take what's up here, I'm going to divide it by what's down here, and I also have to deal with this negative out front. So first thing I need to do is kind of simplify the top, simplify the bottom, and then divide. So on the top, that's going to be 25. So I'm going to start rewriting this. The negative needs to stay out front of the whole thing. We'll deal with that later. The top is going to become 25. Now, as I go to simplify the bottom, I'm going to do the inside of parentheses first. So this whole denominator needs to become one number, and I'm going to do 25 divided by that number. So what I need to do is follow the order of operations down here in the denominator itself. So it's -4 plus -3, that's -15. And then I'm going to add the 11 to it. This is all in parentheses, so I have to finish this first. And I'm going too fast because that is not -15, that's -17. Hopefully you caught that. So it's -17 plus 11. Well, -17 plus 11 is going to be -6. So I'm going to bring everything down. -11 minus, and then the parentheses became -6. So here's my problem. I need to finish the bottom. I know you might say, well, don't you divide before you subtract? That's true, but this is a special case. Whenever you have these big looking fractions, you need to actually complete the top and the bottom. Technically, we haven't written it, but there is parentheses that's assumed on the top and the bottom, which means you must do the whole top, you must do the whole bottom before you divide. It's just not written, so this is a special case. You'll have to memorize that that's what you do. Complete the top, complete the bottom, and then divide. So let's now complete the bottom. That is a minus a negative, so I'm going to go plus plus here. So really, this is -11 plus 6. So if I have -11 or 11 negatives and I add 6 to it, I'm now going to have 5 negatives. So in the bottom, it becomes -5. Don't forget to keep bringing down that negative in front. Now I can divide. I have a number on top and the bottom. When I divide this, that's going to be -5. So the answer to the fraction is -5, but this negative still is out front of the whole thing. Okay, so the division gave me -5, but this negative's still out front. So what do I do with that? It's basically like a -1 that you're going to multiply by this. Or just think, I have a negative. What do you think would happen if you had a negative? It would become a positive. It's basically multiplication. All right, let's look at number 2. So number 2, I've got all this parentheses I got to take care of. The last things I'm going to do is subtract and subtract. So let's turn this into a number. Now, on the inside of parentheses here, I still have to follow the order of operations. So I've got addition, subtraction, and I've got multiplication here. Okay, so multiplying is the first thing I'm going to do inside parentheses. I'm not doing anything with the outside, so I'm just going to bring it down. On the inside, multiply first. 10 times -10 is -100. So that right there is -100. Bring everything down. It's -2 plus -100 minus 13. Let's keep working this. Now it's adding and subtracting. I'm going to do that from left to right. So inside here, it's -2 plus -100. That's -102. And then if I completed that, -102 minus 13, I would say let's change this to plus a negative, right? We don't like to do subtraction with negatives. And that becomes -115. Bring everything down that I haven't used yet. So I'd really like to see it on every line. But if you really just brought it down to there, I'm okay with that. So now I have subtraction and subtraction. So that just goes from left to right. So first thing I'm going to do is 8 minus 14. It's really 8 plus -14. So that's going to be -6 minus -115. And when I see minus a negative, I'm going plus plus. And so it's -6 plus 115. The negatives cancel the positives, and this is positive 109. Okay, I want you to try the rest of this page. I'm going to pause my video for a second, and I'm going to complete the work so you can see it. And then I will put that up. Okay, and you're going to use that as a guide. And once I see your work completed on these, or if you need help, get help. But once I see your work complete on these, then you can get your homework assignment for today. Here is all the completed work.